evening edition. There's a particular kind of weight internally that's different from the weight of what happened to you, which is the previous discussion. And that's the weight of what the mistakes you've made. Because the weight of what happened to you is the past as wound, as something done to you, as something you survived. And that weight is real. And we spent the last lecture really talking about it. But this weight that I'm talking about today, the weight of what you did, the things you chose, the failures you own, those moments where you acted your worst, where you acted from the worst version of you. And because of that, you produce real harm to yourself, to others, or both. And the moments that when they surface in memory, they produce not just simply regret, but something closer to a verdict. As if the worst thing you ever did is the most accurate thing about you. I want to examine that verdict today, not to dismiss the responsibility or offer some type of absolution. We're not absolving anyone. I don't even want to suggest that what you did didn't matter. The consequences weren't real. I mean, all of it's real. It's all real. It happened, right? What I want to examine is the specific move that happens when the thing you did becomes the thing you are. When the mistake becomes the person, the identity. When the failure becomes the final word on the person who failed. See, this move is so common and so thoroughly embedded in the way most people relate to their own history that it rarely gets questioned. The logic seems obvious, right? I did the thing, therefore the thing tells me something true about who I am. And that is as correct as far as it goes. What you did does tell us something true about who you were in that moment, in that context, operating from whatever level of clarity or confusion or fear or pain or whatever was present. But what you did in a moment does not define the totality of who you are across time. And the move from the thing I did to the thing I am is a compression that removes everything except the failure from the definition of the self. Most people who carry this weight are not carrying it because they're excessively self-critical in a pathological sense. They carry it because somewhere they absorb the idea that genuine accountability requires permanent identification with the thing they did wrong. That to let the mistake go would be to minimize the mistake. To separate from the failure as identity would be to deny the failure as fact. And so they hold on to it. And it's not because they feel like they should punish themselves in a way, that they enjoy, because the holding feels like the responsible thing to do. It feels the mature thing, like the honest thing. It sort of feels like what honors the reality of what happened. So what I want to offer tonight is that this is not what accountability is. And the distinction is very important. A mistake is an action taken from a particular level of consciousness, clarity, or capacity at a particular moment in time. It is not a revelation of permanent truth about the self. It's a data point about the self at a specific moment under specific conditions. And the conditions under which most of the significant mistakes people carry were made are conditions that are worth examining honestly. Not so that we can excuse the mistake, but that we can understand it with accuracy and clarity. Most of the mistakes that become identity-level burdens were made from inside of a mask. And I've talked about masks. There are 10 now. I had 8 for 2 years, and now I've added 2 more. But most of these they became burdens. They were operating from inside a mask, from the fear, the anxiety, the distorted perception that the mask identity produces. Like the resume mask, that person operating from the anxiety that their worth requires constant output. That makes decisions about their time and their relationships that produce real harm. The relationships mask person, operating from the need to keep everybody okay and safe, makes decisions about honesty and about their own needs that produce real harm. The rules mask person, who operates from the terror of losing control, makes decisions about trust and flexibility that produce real harm. So the mistakes were real, the harm was real, and the operating conditions from which they emerged, the distortion of the mask identity, are also real. So understanding this does not erase the mistake. It locates it accurately. The mistake is not then evidence that you are fundamentally a harmful person. It is evidence that you were operating from a distorted place at a moment when the distortion produced something you would not choose from a clearer position. And the question of whether you're more than the distortion, whether there's a self that is not defined by the worst thing the distortion produced, is not a question about whether you get to avoid accountability. It's simply asking about whether the self that is being held accountable is accurately identified. There's something else worth saying about the specific relationship between guilt and shame in this context, because they are very and often conflated, and they are importantly different. Guilt is the healthy response to having done something genuinely harmful. It says, you know what? I did something that caused harm and that matters to me, and I want to understand it and address it and not repeat it. Guilt is oriented toward the action. Shame is the response that says, I did something harmful because there's something fundamentally wrong with me. Shame is a terrible thing. It is oriented toward the identity. Guilt produces genuine accountability. Yes, I did it. I take responsibility. And genuine movement. Shame, on the other hand, produces the paralysis of the person who has collapsed into the verdict. And the conflation of the two, people think they're the same, they're not. The conflation of the two, the idea that genuine accountability requires the shame response rather than the guilt response, is one of the most persistent and most damaging errors in the way most people relate to their own failures. Genuine accountability does not require shame. It requires honesty about what happened, genuine understanding of the harm that was caused, genuine engagement with what produced the action, and genuine repair where repair is possible and acceptable, and genuine movement toward a different way of operating. So none of those things require permanent identification with the failure. In fact, permanent identification with the failure makes most of them harder. A person who has collapsed in shame about what they did is not in the best position to understand it clearly or to make genuine repair. The shame is consuming the attention that clarity requires. I want to examine this verdict, and I want to talk about where the verdict comes from, because the verdict that a person's mistakes define them is not self-generated in most cases. It was taught. It was communicated through the responses of specific people in specific communities to specific failures or experiences in a way that established the equation between mistake and the identity. And understanding the source of the verdict does not invalidate the genuine accountability that the mistake requires. But it does raise a question that most people have never seriously asked. Is the verdict accurate? Not whether the mistake was real, whether the conclusion drawn from it, that the mistake is the most essential truth about the person who made it, is true or accurate. In most cases, the verdict was delivered by someone who was also operating from distortion. I mean, a parent who responded to a child's failure with contempt or with a sweeping statement about the child's character. A community like a church that responded to a member's transgression with permanent definition rather than genuine accountability and genuine restoration. A relationship that responded to betrayal with a verdict about the betraying person's fundamental nature that was meant to wound and belittle. I mean, these responses may have felt like truth in the moment. They are, and they may still feel like truth, but they weren't delivered from a place of wisdom about identity. They were delivered from a place of pain or from a place of control or limited understanding of human beings as things that can be permanently defined by their worst moments. And the person who received the verdict, often in a moment of vulnerability after this failure, absorbed it, adopted it, and made it truth. And they weren't weak in that. They were just human beings, and human beings absorb the verdicts of people whose opinion matters to them, particularly in the moments when their own sense of themselves is most uncertain or feared. So the failure had already shaken the ground. The verdict confirmed the fear that the failure had introduced, and the confirmation, once absorbed, became the operating premise. I did that thing because I'm this kind of person. And this kind of person does not deserve, is not capable of, is not entitled to what the people without this kind of failure in their history have access to. Love, acceptance, forgiveness, whatever. That premise is not a fact. It's a story, it's a narrative, it's fiction. And it's a story with a specific origin, delivered by specific people in a specific moment, absorbed under specific conditions. And like every story, it can be examined. Its source can be seen clearly. Its accuracy can be genuinely questioned. And the questioning, when it is true, is not the denial of the failure. It's the refusal to let the failure's most limited and most punishing interpretation be the permanent description of the person who failed. So, releasing the verdict is not necessarily the same as releasing the responsibility. This is also the thing most people fear when they consider the possibility that their mistakes do not define them. They say, man, if I release this thing and this is not who I am, that means I'm not taking accountability, and the people that I hurt are going to come back and they're going to say, well, you know, you're still trying to make excuses, and that's not it. Some people think that if they stop being the person who did that thing, they're somehow escaping the weight of having done that thing. But the opposite is true. The person who is still collapsed in the verdict is the person who has never done the genuine work of accountability. Why? Because the collapse into shame is consuming the energy and the attention that repair and understanding require. So the shame feels like payment, but it's not payment. It's avoidance in the form of self-punishment. The genuine work of accountability, when the verdict has been released, looks different. It looks like a person who can look at what they did with clear eyes rather than through the distortion of shame, who can understand honestly what produced it, what they were operating from, what the distortion was doing in that moment, who can engage with the harm that was caused with genuine presence rather than through the fog of self-condemnation, who can make genuine repair, not as penance, but as a genuine expression of care for the person or people who were harmed in the choice, and who can carry the learning from the failure as information about where the work is rather than a verdict about the totality of who they really are. And then what remains after the verdict is released is a person with a more accurate relationship to their own history, not some sanitized, whitewashed history. A history from which the difficult parts have been removed. A history that is held with genuine honesty and compassion simultaneously, where what was done is seen clearly and owned fully, and where the person who did it is understood to be a human being operating from a particular level of clarity in that moment, who is capable of something different from a different place. See, that capability, the capacity to operate differently from a clear place, is not something you earn by sufficiently, I can't even talk tonight, punishing yourself for the past. It's something you develop by doing the work that produces the clarity. And the work that produces the clarity is exactly what I'm talking about. What everything that I do from this desk is doing. Not the work of cataloging and keeping a list of your failures more thoroughly. The work of uncovering the identity that was present before the failure and that is present still underneath them, more real than any of them and not defined by any of them. See, your mistakes tell the story of a person operating under conditions of distortion. They don't tell the story of who you are underneath the distortion. That story has not yet been fully told. And the telling of it, which begins the moment you stop allowing the worst thing you ever did to be the last word on the best thing you actually are, is the specific work of freedom that everything in this series has been building toward. So here we go. You have the language for what bondage is, how masks work, what the false identifications cost you, and why neither your past nor your failures are the final word on your identity. What comes next in these lectures is the critique of the landscape you've been working in, and after that, the philosophy that points towards something that is actually true. So stay with it. The handle is in your hands now. I'm James. This is Unbound.